Hello, my name is Cathy Stevulak, the director of the documentary film Threads. Threads tells the story of a remarkable group of women who were part of transforming and reimagining Kantha, the embroidered quilts of Bengal, from items of household use to elaborate storytelling textiles for public display. I lived in Bangladesh for 2 years and had the privilege of traveling throughout the country and visiting many artisans. My talk today is inspired by what I learned from them and also what I learned from scholars, curators, and other community leaders who are dedicated to the promotion and research of the art of craft. I'd like to talk today a little of the history of Kantha, its making and its uses, as well as tell a little-known story of the revival of Kantha beginning in the 1970s. Kantha, an ancient textile art, was almost lost. Today, tens of thousands of women in Bengal earn income by stitching Kantha. Their work can be found in many forms, from bed covers to scarves like I have on, to wall hangings, such as this story of Tagore's Shayama.
Kantha, or what is now commonly known as nakshi Kantha, is an important art of the Bengal region that now comprises Bangladesh and West Bengal in India. To make Kantha, several layers of cloth, which are often recycled men's and women's clothing, such as saris, dhotis, and lungis, are stitched together. As we can see in this backlit panel of a Kantha at the Philadelphia Museum of Art exhibition, the ground is a patchwork of white fabrics over which a woman embroidered scenes and symbols with colored threads. She uses a central lotus, typical of Kantha design, as the focal point. Here, we see a more obvious piecing together of fabrics with a small version of a lotus placed off-center. Kantha can also be more rudimentary, such as this bed cover made of patched and tattered fabrics that is airing on this clothesline. Looking at this reminds me of some of the earliest references to Kantha in writings as early as 6th century BCE that tell of Kantha as patched clothing that was worn by ascetics and is symbol of self-discipline and poverty. Some of the earliest types of Kantha were the Lahori Kanthas, which were made by joining coarse cloth of garments that were worn by women in the Rajshahi district. To see a full-length Kantha being made from saris, perhaps one destined to be a bed cover, we go to this village in Bangladesh. Here, a woman is spreading layers of fabric on the ground and stitching them together. We'll notice that the fabric edges are held to the ground by stones in this case, but others may use the sharp thorns of date palm trees to fasten the cloth to the ground. Once this preparatory work is complete, the Kantha maker may then choose to stitch the entire piece with patterns of varying types and complexity, and in some cases, decorate the quilt with pictorial scenes. Older Kantha were traditionally made on a white cotton ground, with a variety of stitches used to quilt several layers of old cloth together. The threads were often pulled from the borders of used saris, with the typical colors being black, blue, and red. The most basic of the stitches in Kantha is the running stitch. In this piece, we can see that the Kantha maker used one of several forms of the running stitch, in this case called the Kantha stitch, to create the exquisite texturing of traditional Kanthas. To do this, the quilter passes the needle through the layers of the cloth, and with the spaces between the stitches being larger than the actual stitches, as we can see in this example. Stitches in the next row are taken slightly behind or ahead of the first row, creating a characteristic ripple effect in the Kantha. In this detail, we also see a recycled sari border as the Kantha border. Another border treatment is shown in this pictorial work, whose maker embroidered the border rather than taking it from a used sari. Here, as another form of the running stitch, the bending stitch forms around designs on the kata. The ripples gently bring forward an exceptional three-dimensional depth to the cloth. This texturing effect was also made possible by the free-form use of tension, with no hoops being used. But rather the maker holds the cloth in her hand, and for larger pieces, places one end of the cloth under a foot. In contemporary kata, a hoop is often used, and the surface of the cloth is smooth even when the running stitch is used. This recent piece is also on a white ground, but it is silk rather than cotton as in earlier katas. And now as well, colorful cloth from old saris and dhotis, or new cloth, is often used as the ground. This embroiderer is using the borat, or filling stitch, to complete a pictorial pattern that has been carefully drawn onto silk cloth. And later, running stitches will fill the gap between the pictorial elements. In older katas, there may have been designs or a grid drawn onto the katas. However, now there is often much more detail drawn onto the katas before the maker starts stitching. Part of the beauty of katas is the depth of meaning and creativity that women instill in their quilts by their choice of symbols and patterns. Their voices and their dreams come out in the stories that they stitch on their kata. I have to wonder about the intention of the kata maker of this piece, as she stitched over 100 petals in the lotus, as well as an elephant and a peacock, symbols of prosperity and of love. I imagine a grandmother or a mother embroidering good wishes and warmth into every stitch for a girl to take with her to her new home after marriage, and I can also envisage a new bride wrapping herself in this soft cloth as a connection back to her home and family, perhaps then making a kata of her own in anticipation of wrapping her first infant. Originally, katas were meant to be spread out flat and could be viewed from all angles, as if you could walk all around them. A lotus as the central element is typical in kata making, as is the tree of life, often placed in the four corners of the kata to represent the four directions. Kalka motifs, which we see next to the trees of life in this piece, have also become very popular since Mughal times. Other elements like animals, boats, chariots, kitchen, and agricultural implements are commonly used to express the daily life or the wishes of the maker. Women had creative freedom to design their cloth as they wished. They followed some conventions of symbol and pattern, but they were free to tell their own stories or make their own work with their own creativity. These images of kata, both made in Faridpur district in the 19th century, exhibit a central lotus, trees of life in some corners, and animals that were of meaning to the makers. The image on the right shows a density and randomness of stitching that makes the white ground almost imperceptible and brings forward to me a very different personality behind the stitches. This contemporary kata shows variations on a lotus design, here being used to form a border pattern, and here with 3 lotuses forming part of a tree of life. Until recently, women made kata only for domestic use, for ceremonies and special gifts. These include bed covers for the winter months, as well as blankets and wraps for adults and infants, prayer mats, and seating for guests. This smaller piece, a 19th century archalada, is from Khulna district and was used for wrapping toiletries such as combs and mirrors. It's also notable for the use of silk threads, which were uncommon before the mid-20th century. And from Faridpur district in cotton, this pillow cover or puja seat features 2 peacocks with a snake and figures that tell the tale of Krishna transforming into Kali. There's such a rich history of kata, its designs, motifs, and making, so much more than I could introduce today. I feel that each kata invites us to meet its maker and connect with her life and culture. For further discovery of this art, I suggest several books, amongst others that are available. Dr. Nias Saman's The Art of Kantha Embroidery has a comprehensive description of kantha making, stitches, symbols, regional characteristics, and kantha revival. And other books that feature kantha collections from West and East Bengal, along with commentary of curators and other scholars, are Kantha, Philadelphia Museum of Art, Bengali Kantha, Fukuoka Asia Art Museum, Crafts of West Bengal, and The Aesthetics and Vocabulary of Nakshi Kantha, Bangladesh National Museum Collection. Bengali poet Jasimuddin immortalized kantha in a work that was first published in 1939, Nakshi Katar Mat, or The Field of the Embroidered Quilt. In this book, he refers to nakshi kantha, a term that captured the feelings of the region, and it is commonly used now. Nakshi refers to designed cloth. Yet, by the middle of the 20th century, kantha making, a tradition that had survived the centuries, was at risk of being lost. With communal strife and the partition of India into Pakistan and India, which took place in 1947, there were mass disruptions and migrations of families across borders, as well as socio-political forces that spurred the decline of kantha. Furthermore, after the War of Independence for Bangladesh in 1971, along with famine and mass flooding in the new country, many women were dispersed, widowed, or destitute, and village women could no longer spare the time to embroider kantha. So the ancient tradition of kantha making was in danger of disappearing. How is it then that kantha is now flourishing? The kantha revival happened slowly, as influential figures began to talk about what was in danger of being lost, and also national pride took root in the new country of Bangladesh. The late 70s and the early 80s saw a number of very important developments in kantha's revival. Organizations like Karika and Arong and Kumudini in Bangladesh employed women to make kantha, helping to retain the skills on which the revival would be based, and also allowing these women to earn a livelihood. Many more people were involved. The details are in Nias Saman's book on the art of kantha embroidery. However, I'd like to share with you a story about a project that was pivotal in keeping kantha in the public eye and refined kantha from a domestic art to art for public display. In the late 70s, a new hotel in Dhaka called the Shonargan Hotel was under construction. The hotel's management decided to use local art in decorating the hotel where possible, and Dr. Zaman notes they wanted to actually make it something iconic of Bangladesh. A small group of women got together to discuss art for the hotel, and they were brought some pictures of kantha from the Philadelphia Museum of Art, including this one from the Stella Kramrisch collection. Artist Surayia Rahman joined the group and focused on designing a large wall hanging inspired by three elements in the work: a boat, elephants, and dancers. The large finished piece, in which Surayia incorporated the three elements in her own way, marked a turning point in the revival of kantha. A domestic art previously hidden in the home and made to be spread out flat was now art to hang on a wall and designed to have a top and a bottom. A craft of great beauty, made with fine skills and deserving to be given value as fine art. Surayia herself imagined kantha as some of the finest tapestries in the world, and this new art form became known as nakshi kantha tapestry. While some protested that this new art form was not truly kantha, Surayia ignored them and carried on creating, telling stories on cloth based on women's lives and also on Bengali culture, poetry, and history. She was determined that everyone would recognize nakshi kantha as art. Over 3 decades, hundreds of women came to Surayya to learn to embroider works for public display and for an income. This nakshi Kantha tapestry that they created together tells a story of star-crossed lovers, a Muslim boatman and a Hindu girl forbidden to marry. It is based on Jasimuddin's poem, Shojan Badar Ghat, or Gypsy Wharf. Notice the lotus in the center, which is framed by small boats in keeping with the story. The revival of Kantha in Bangladesh was followed by its revival in West Bengal, again with visionary community leaders bringing together women to develop indigenous textile craft. Many forms of Kantha, for domestic use, for clothing and accessories, and for public display, are now created by tens of thousands of women across Bengal and have become popular around the world. So the revival of Kantha took place as a result of various influences. The resurgence of national pride, a quest to revive traditional crafts, as well as the support of governments, corporations, and non-governmental organizations for preservation of culture and women's work, and the intervention of local individuals and foreigners who saw opportunity to encourage a brighter future for women and their communities. And most fundamentally, women from all economic and social backgrounds joined hands to share their skills and to continue to create the art of Kantha.
The story continues as women in India and Bangladesh draw inspiration and livelihoods from this beautiful and intricate work that is at once ancient and also surprisingly modern. If you are interested, you can now watch a short trailer of Threads film, which we show in celebration of all Kantha makers, indeed all craftspeople, who share their soul and their heritage within and beyond their borders.
You have to be very close to them. অনেকে এসে বলে কি করছে সুরাইয়া, না ক্লোজ হলে শেখানো যায়, শিখতে পারে।
She trained the women and they became experts.
আমরা সবার অবস্থা তো খারাপ আছি, আমরা এই সেলাইয়ের বহুত কিছু করছি, শুকর আমরা।
It seemed as if the Kantha had been born again suddenly.